Welcome to the finale of my Vanilla Terrarian vs Calamity Revengeance Mode challenge, where I fight to uphold the autistic ideal that change is bad by fighting the vanilla way. Last video I beat Moonlord, so now it's time for the real challenge, as the bosses keep getting harder while my gear remains mostly the same. The difficulty ramps up from here, so I'll be tracking deaths and playtime to show how difficult each boss was to beat, starting at 275 deaths and 63 hours of playtime so far. After testing my gear against the Profaned Guardians, I decided to use hollowed armor because at the time I thought I could just get good enough at dodging to take 0 damage by nullifying one hit every 30 seconds, and I really just never had a reason to use post-Moonlord armor before, so I underestimated it and struggled against the first post-Moonlord boss as a result. To compensate for this, for my weapons I settled on using a hybrid setup of every style. I used a Nimbus Rod and Terra Prisma for some passive damage while using Meow Mirror as my main weapon for the piercing projectiles in order to not get blocked by the profane rocks. I switched to the SDMG for the last phase so I could focus on dodging and running from the boss, and used alternating stacks of Ichor and Cursed Flame bullets so I could keep both status effects on the boss at the same time for as long as possible. As the first post-Moonlord boss, it really shouldn't have given me this much trouble, but I did a lot of things throughout this challenge that made it harder on me than it should have been, so this first boss already added over 100 more deaths to the tally. I decided to grind out solar armor and tested it out against the Profaned Guardians a few times, only to decide against using it on Dragonfolly. Honestly, I don't know what was going through my head at the time. In this fight, I chose to use the Star Wrath to take out Dragonfolly's minions faster, and SDMG again since it's easier to hit a fast moving target at range. For Calamity players who haven't watched the previous parts of the challenge, you might have noticed that I have infinite flight, and that's because I modded out all changes to vanilla weapons, armor, gear, stats, and mechanics to take on these bosses as a truly vanilla Terrarian. For this reason, I lose out on several buffs like faster base movement speed, and I can't even use the Calamity option to hold down to fall faster, which would have trivialized this fight, and must rely on a slime mount for increased fall speed, which has gotten me killed hundreds of times across different bosses. The soaring insignia giving infinite flight is really the only buff, and I could always land on platforms to reset my flight, so it's nothing crazy. Ultimately, Dragonfolly wasn't too much trouble and only took a handful of attempts over a few hours. Providence was up next, and I'm still using hallowed armor like a dumbass, but the Star Wrath shreds the giant hitbox, so I don't have to try that hard yet. This is one of those Calamity bosses, which is why it took me so long to actually try out the mod. A lot of the mechanics are really well designed, but if there's one complaint I have about Calamity bosses, it's how random some attacks can be. Providence littering 100 lightly homing little flames around my arena just doesn't feel like the vanilla Terraria bosses I love and am used to. But the rest of the boss fight is on point, and I'm doing this fight as vanilla Terrarian, so it's not too bad. And yes, I understand just how frustrated people will be in the comments that I decided to make my very first playthrough of the Calamity mod a challenge run where I don't even use Calamity items or mechanics. But remember, change is bad, so the challenge will continue without compromise. Continuing to follow the Calamity Wiki boss order, I fought Stormweaver next, and there really isn't much to say about him. The 99.9% damage reduction on every segment except the tail in the first phase wasn't really a problem because I just used Daybreak since damage over time effects don't get reduced by damage reduction, and circling Stormweaver to hit the tail was also incredibly easy. In some of my first attempts, I swapped to Meowmere for the later phases for double the DPS, but in my successful attempt, I just used Daybreak the whole time because it was easier to just focus on dodging rather than interrupt my flow and change weapons in the middle of the fight. Finally, in the fight against Ceaseless Void, after a bunch of deaths, I learned to use solar armor for once, and then proceed to beat the boss on my first attempt with it. Upon further consideration, I realized that nullifying one hit every 30 seconds is only really better than solar armor if I take no more than 2 hits every 30 seconds or so, because I just simply reduce the damage more with solar armor otherwise, on top of the fact that solar armor gives me a dash which I can use to avoid contact damage, and gives me more melee damage which really shows in this boss's kill time. Now, after realizing the power of solar armor, I promptly returned to using hallowed armor, because as helpful as the dash was for avoiding contact damage, I just kept accidentally dashing into projectiles in that Ceaseless Void fight, and still had some idea in my head that eventually the bosses would be so strong that I'd get one shot even with solar armor, and hallowed armor would just be essential. But perhaps it was just the aversion to change that kept me running the same bad set of armor. Not that any of that matters against Signus, because the Envoy of the Devourer took just 3 attempts. It's not Terraria without at least one boss you can cheese just by circling it. Polterghast was a strangely difficult boss at first, but I quickly found a strategy that made him manageable. All of his attacks were easy to dodge, but the way the boss moves around the arena made me run into him on accident a lot. But the worst part was how he moved into position to do the diagonal charge attack. Polterghast always lagged behind enough that he'd get into position to do the attack the moment I stopped moving, so I had to be extremely particular about slowing down to bait the attack, and then speed up to dodge. So for this fight, I opted for a summoner build to focus on dodging. If you ever wonder why I used the Terra Prisma instead of the Stardust Dragon Staff, it's simply because the summons move faster. The Stardust Dragon seriously struggles to keep up with Calamity bosses. I didn't plan for it, but the summons took out the clone first, which made the fight easy, even though my defense was so low I'd get 2-shot if I didn't drink a potion after the first hit. Up to this point, the bosses have been easy enough that I haven't had to optimize too hard, but as I enter the final 5, the Old Duke is the first boss to start pushing the limits of my vanilla gear. Fast moving predictive dashes make it incredibly hard to dodge, and 50% damage reduction while attacking means that Daybreak is my best weapon again, but even still, the boss fight is a slog and I have to repeatedly refresh my buffs throughout the fight. Old Duke's Vortexes can also deal half my health and damage through solar armor with an endurance potion and life force potion, so I even brought out the heart statues and used heart reach potions for this fight, although Old Duke's own shark attacks release hearts too. I need a large arena for this fight, but I died in a few attempts to space gravity, so I also needed to put a roof on it. I found that running away from Old Duke made it easier to dodge the predictive dashes than trying to change direction too much, but late in the fight as he teleported around, I had to learn to dodge properly too, and make full use of my solar armor dash. The fight was so tense and fast-paced that at one point I accidentally hit the function key at the same time as I was pressing W, which swapped my WASD into arrow keys, so I alt-tabbed to pause and had to take a breath before fixing the problem and tabbing back in so I didn't let my sudden panic get me killed. In total, the Old Duke took me 14 minutes and 47 seconds to kill. At this point, I started gathering the pieces for the last upgrade I'll get to my gear, the Zenith. And it's a weapon that would have really helped with this next boss, but in the Calamity mod, the Zenith is locked behind Yharon, so while it'd be consistent with the vanilla Terrarian versus Calamity or Vengeance mode concept to mod back the vanilla crafting recipe, I decided that it would be inappropriate to get it before its proper place in progression, so instead I chose to suffer. And suffer I did, so make sure to subscribe so my suffering was worth it. Devourer, I've come to bargain.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
You cannot do this forever.
Actually, I can. This is how things are now. You and me, trapped in this moment, endlessly.
Then you will spend eternity dying.
Yes.
Until this point, the post-Moonlord bosses have caused me enough trouble to double my total deaths, but none of them compare to the deaths caused by the Devourer of Gods. Even with solar armor and buffs, I could be 2-hit by a bite and any other attack, and with precise bullet hell attacks, I frequently dashed into bullets on accident. But without the solar armor dash, I'd struggle to dodge the Devourer's bites, on top of the Cosmic Guardian minions. At one point I grinded out the Frost Shield for the percent damage reduction while under half health, but it almost never helped me tank an extra hit. On top of this, the Devourer's body segments have 70 defense, 92.5% damage reduction, and immunity to all vanilla debuffs, so none of my weapons did good damage to the boss. And the boss inflicted the extreme gravity debuff, nullifying my infinite flight, so I had to do this fight without the soaring insignia. Another gamer might have given up after the first few hundred deaths with no end in sight, but I have autism, and I am God's gamer. I just needed the one weapon from Moonlord that I hadn't gotten yet, and a few hundred more attempts. It was also this fight that taught me that the Calamity mod has a hybrid damage penalty, lowering summoner damage for holding a non-summoner weapon. So I just went all in on summoner damage and focused purely on dodging and set up a Wraith statue to keep my sentries firing in the second phase. After 789 deaths and 59 hours of attempts, I finally defeated the Devourer of Gods. Yharon was up next, and you might think that as the next boss in the progression order, he'd be even harder, but as tough as it was, the biggest obstacle to beating this boss was just how many phases he has and how long it took to get so far into the fight, just to have about 10 seconds to try to learn the new phase before dying and having to restart 12 minutes into the fight. Since this fight took so long, I'll go over each phase, then skip ahead to the next instead of showing the whole thing sped up. Phase 1 was simple. I dodged the flare dust, dashed through the fast dash, then get distance and dash through the second slow dash. He also makes a flare nado, but it's small and easy to avoid. I've done this phase enough to never take damage. Phase 2 gave me a lot of trouble because the bullet hell and upgraded Infernato, but I learned that I just need to lure Yharon and the Infernato to one side of the arena and fly to the other side for the bullet hell so it would spread out enough by the time it reached me to easily fly through. I couldn't get many attacks off, but Yharon loses a chunk of health every time he uses the bullet hell, which was probably more damage than my actual attacks. Phase 3 was easy again, just a bunch of dashes which I can dash through myself except for one which comes with homing flare dust, and an easy to dodge bullet hell where I can just hover in place to avoid the flare dust. Phase 4 was where things got tough. The 3 flare dust rings required me to move as far as possible to not have to worry about them, but because they came immediately after harder bullet hell like Phase 2, I had to be sure to lure Yharon to the side of the arena for that, so I could have the clearance get far enough, all while Yharon littered stationary flare dust around the arena. On top of all that, I kept an ear out for the sound of Yharon doing the fireball attack that rains down before splitting into more fireballs that shoot up and rain down again, so I could check for Yharon on the minimap and just stay completely out of the way of that. Phase 5 was mostly the same, but more bullet hells which meant Yharon killed himself faster. Both phases 4 and 5 were essentially obstacle courses with 3 attacks so tricky to deal with that I needed to get as far away from them as possible. Phase 6 was hell. What in the world is this bullet hell? If anyone knows, please tell me. The wiki suggests that it's supposed to be the easy bullet hell from Phase 3, but for this challenge I had to mod an old open source copy of the Calamity mod to remove changes to vanilla items and mechanics, so it could be anything from an older version of the boss to a bug introduced by me modding the mod. It doesn't seem to be listed in the history for Yharon's wiki page, and Yharon seems to randomly alternate between bullet hell patterns, but with a nigh undodgeable attack like this on top of just another spam fest of attacks, including making me deal with an Infernato at the same time as I tried to get through a bullet hell where Yharon then dashes through, leaving a trail of flare bombs so I can't dash through Yharon. I had to tank my way through so much of this fight and just pray I got lucky. Finally, Phase 7, my first and last time getting this far. A simple attack pattern, but I drop under 10 HP messing up a dash. I get lucky and my second dash in the wrong direction is timed well enough that I don't die. The bullet hell is easy, so I lock in and heal all the way to full, and it is only then that I realize how blessed this run was, as Yharon uses the nigh undodgeable bullet hell. Again. The bullet hells are random in this phase too. I just rolled the jackpot on not dying, and as I realized this, I managed to dodge this bullet hell for the only time in this run. One more nigh undodgeable bullet hell left, but it doesn't matter because this fight is over. Yharon is defeated with a nice clean 1,500 total deaths. I really enjoyed Yharon besides the nightmarish bullet hell because it felt like just a more challenging vanilla boss. Each phase was something I could solve while still making it a challenge to execute that solution, but now as I get my last gear upgrade, the Zenith, and construct the Codebreaker, it's on to my favorite boss of the Calamity mod, the Exo Mechs. Unlike other bosses, the learning process for this boss wasn't so linear, but rather the choice of what order to fight the bosses in allowed me to learn all parts of the fight separately before doing the full boss fight, which is probably what makes it so impressive to me that this was the second hardest boss in terms of total deaths. It didn't feel as bad as dying to Yharon because whatever part I got stuck on, I could just try that part first next time until I finally got comfortable enough with all phases of the fight to win. One issue I ran into for this challenge was that the individual bosses drop modded healing potions on death, so I had to fill my inventory with beer to not pick them up and accidentally win using modded potions. 200 HP per potion is plenty enough, Calamity mod. I decided to take out Ares first, as the Blender Laser gave me the most trouble of any of the attacks, and the next worst attack for me was the combo of the Gauss Nuke and Plasma Cannon. I made the arena way taller to give myself lots of room to dodge, and I found myself using the full height of the arena so I didn't have to change directions in the middle of an attack pattern. I chose to do Artemis and Apollo next because of the other spinning laser attack, and ultimately I just found that moving up and down was the best strategy for dodging almost everything. And with practice against Thanatos, I realized I could manipulate his pathing to miss with the lasers fairly consistently, so while my nerves got to me, I could take my time and relax to close out the fight. Finally, we've reached the end. Just one more boss, and after all this time, I had a feeling that the Supreme Witch wouldn't really be all that bad. In fact, within the first 3 hours of attempts, I had already managed to get her down to 10% health and survived the final bullet hell before dying. This should be easy, I thought, but Calamity isn't as straightforward as vanilla, and in my opinion, no other boss demonstrates that better. Pure chaos, a dodging skill check that rises in difficulty all the way to the end, a fight that deserves to be shown in full. And there we have it. With the Supreme Witch defeated, I have proven something. Honestly, I just did this challenge because YouTube Studio said there was a lot of demand for Calamity videos, and I thought it'd be funny to play it like this. If you enjoy silly gaming challenges like this, then make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below what you liked or what you didn't like about my video. Feedback is always appreciated. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. God bless.